What are 7 ways that we as Americans tend to spend our money that seems perfectly normal to us, but seems crazy and insane to other countries and other cultures? Let's go for a walk and talk about this. And be sure to stay until the end, because the last example I'm going to give you is something that a lot of Americans spend our money on, but that 80% of us regret once we buy it. And we all know it's a lousy thing to buy, but so many of us do buy it. So be sure to stay to the end where I'll share what that is. So I think the first one is, the US is very credit card culture based. Credit card and the convenience of credit cards has just become a much bigger part of our lives over the last decade. And many countries really don't use credit cards at all. You've got to be cash based. I don't carry much cash on me. I know a lot of my friends don't carry cash on me. And people in other countries are like, well, what do you mean you don't have $20 on you or $30 on you? You go to a restaurant that doesn't accept credit cards, and I'm like, I hope I have enough cash on me to cover this. So that's item number 1. Okay, item number 2. And this might get me in trouble in the comments. This is not a judgment call. It's just a fact. It's a trend that's taking place here in the U.S. that happens much less in other countries. And that is, we as Americans tend to have a lot of clothes. And it hasn't always been that way in the United States. In the 1930s, the average American had 9 outfits. And my grandparents came over as first-generation immigrants in the 1930s. And again, the average American had 9 outfits in 1930. And I'd be surprised if my grandparents had 9 outfits, right? My grandfather was a farmer. How many pairs of overalls does a farmer have? I don't know. But now, the average American has 30 outfits. And for a guy, that would be a shirt and a pair of slacks. Guys really don't use the term outfits, but I think we all know what I'm talking about. So now we have 30 outfits. And I think part of that is just the cost of clothing has gone down because now we've outsourced a lot of that to other countries. And there's this term fast fashion where, trends are changing much more quickly than they did. But I think a lot of cultures look at that and say, you have an outfit for every day of the week. That's a lot. Okay, another one that's probably going to get me in trouble in the comments. Number 3, we buy a lot of new cars. We buy a lot of trucks in areas that we don't need trucks, and just in general, we buy more new cars here in the United States than probably any other country in the world, and that probably has to do with our per capita GDP, right? We're fortunate that in America, many of us earn much more money than in other countries, but it's trending in the right direction. In 2006, we used to hold our cars 4 years. In 2006, the average person held on to a new car for 4 years before they bought another new car. And now it's 6 years. But this might be debatable, but I think the quality of cars has gone up quite a bit. And I remember when I was 10 years old, we had a car that we got 100,000 miles on it, my parents. And I remember we actually celebrated that. That was a big deal. And, today cars will get well over 200,000 miles and will last at least 10 years, if not more. So turning over a car every 6 years is good, but I think there's probably even more room to improve on that. All right, stick with me, because the one I'm going to close today's video on is something that 80% of Americans regret buying, but we still buy a ton of it. So stick with me for that. The next one is monthly subscriptions. Boy, just in the last 10 years, really in the last 5 years, right? The monthly subscriptions that we have for services on our phone, for streaming services. How many streaming I know people that have 3 or 4 streaming services or more. I just saw that I think it's called the Sunday Night Football package on YouTube is like $450. I mean, that's real money, right? So our monthly subscriptions, our season subscriptions, and then the meal prep services that have gotten so popular in the last couple of years. So we do a lot of subscription services, and if they're providing convenience, if they're providing value for you, there's nothing wrong with that. But how many of us have found out, like, I've been paying for this service for 6 months or a year and I forgot I had it, right? So don't let that happen to you. Keep on top of what your subscriptions are. Okay, the next one is upgrading too soon. And by that I mean our smartphones, right? Americans tend to swap out our phones every 2 to 3 years. And on one level, I totally understand that, right? What is an item that we use more on a daily basis, if not our phones, right? But you think about it, an iPhone 10, an iPhone 12, an iPhone 14, what are really the major changes that have happened that drive us to get those new phones? And I think for many of us, last year's model can work perfectly fine, but we as Americans tend to upgrade every 2 to 3 years as opposed to maybe 4 or 5 years in other countries. And it's just part of our culture, right? Our culture is all about bigger, shiny, newer, better and cooler. And in some ways that works against us. So let's keep going, and pretty soon I'm getting the last one where 80% of the people regret buying. And so the next item, the second to last item that other cultures look at us and say, I didn't know Americans do that, and I wonder why they do that. And that is the prevalence of second homes. Now, I know a lot of viewers, I don't have a second home. I talk about not having a second home, particularly now with Airbnb, but second home ownership is much more popular in the US. And I think part of that is because we're a bigger country, right? And some families, have a summer cottage out on the lake. And in other countries, it's less popular than here, partly because, it's pretty easy. The buying process in California for a house is very similar to what the buying process would be in Tennessee. And those are areas very far apart. So if you wanted to be visiting both of those locations, Americans would be tempted to buy a second home in that situation. Where if you were in South America and you were in Ecuador and the country next to you, one of the countries next to you is Peru, it's pretty difficult for somebody from Ecuador to buy a second home in Peru. So I think that's one of the reasons it's less prevalent. Probably easier in the EU just because of the EU changes and having things standardized. Okay. But let's jump into the biggest one that I think when I mention it, people will say, yeah, I agree, that is kind of crazy. And 80% of people that do buy it end up regretting it later. And that is timeshares. How many of us have been on vacation and we get an offer to get, free tickets to a show that we want to see or to an amusement park. And we say, yeah, I'll sit through a 2-hour timeshare, which is timeshare presentation, which is never 2 hours. And we know going in, it's probably not going to be 2 hours. And we know going in, it's probably going to be high pressure. But the reality is, timeshares, again, over 80% of the people that buy timeshares regret it. Now, I also know people that love their timeshare. So, if you've bought it and you're happy with it, great. But I'm just sharing things that other cultures look at Americans and say, this is crazy. And this is an example that I think a lot of Americans think is crazy as well. I think most of us, when we find out a friend bought a timeshare, we think, why would you do that, right? But yet a lot of us do buy timeshares. And one of the things that I think makes timeshares so unattractive is they drop in value almost immediately, right? There's a secondary market where you can buy timeshares, and you can buy it at the market price, which is quite a bit less, right? A lot of that premium goes to the salesperson that sells you things and promotes the positives of the timeshare, but doesn't tell you the negative things. And I think one of the big negatives is you know, the monthly maintenance costs on a timeshare, the average in the United States is $700 per week that you have the timeshare per year. And now with Airbnb and other services like that, you know, why pay that maintenance fee when you can just apply that towards an Airbnb? So anyways, those are 7 insane ways that Americans spend money. And now that I've been fortunate in the last 3 or 4 years to be able to travel and go to other countries and hear what other countries and other people say about Americans, I can verify that. They do think it's crazy. I should add to that, the supersized drinks. And the other thing people would say that, you know, is kind of small and kind of silly. But the other thing that they would say is, you know, having ice in all our drinks. That's a trivial thing, but they think that's kind of funny. And even in some countries, drinking cold beer. You know, a lot of places like to drink beer warm. So I hope you found this video helpful. If you did, give me a thumbs up. Really does help other people find the video as well. Think about subscribing if you haven't yet. I'd love to have you as a subscriber, and leave me a comment. I read all of the comments every day and try to reply to at least a dozen, if not a couple dozen of the comments. If I haven't replied yet to your comment, hopefully I will soon. And until next time, I'm Azul, encouraging you to take full advantage of the youth of your senior years. Remember, you're only young once. Use your time wisely.